Alrighty, anybody not have a handout that desires one? Alrighty. We have a lot to get through, so we'll see where we get to today. But before we begin, we're going to do a little bit of a review. And the review is myself and Jordan, did 4 fundamental classes, foundational classes, before we dove into these hard topics. And I want you to say what they are. So what was the first lesson we had on the image of God, the Imago Dei? Yes, it's true. Okay, go ahead. Yes, we are made in God's image to represent Him to the rest of the world. What is the number 2? Sin has tarnished how we view ourselves. What's number 3? I can't hear you. Jesus is the true representative of God on earth. And then number 4? It's blank. So you're going to have to remember. Body and soul. Is that right, Jordan? Let's go. Great job. Ooh, what about the body and soul? Anybody remember what about the body and soul? Jordan's having a quiz. I wasn't here, so I'm off the hook. What about the body and soul? Are we 2 separate beings? Oh, Daniel. What was it, Daniel? You can throw it back up. We are created body and soul. We are created both. We're a unified being of 2 parts, which is fantastic. Okay, today we are talking about abortion. And yeah, something I realized as Jordan was doing Made last week, these are heavy topics. I mean, not that I just realized that, but these are heavy topics. And I don't want to, I'm somebody who likes to joke a little bit and lighten the mood and when I teach at times. I might do that today. That's not because this is a light topic. It's a heavy topic. And there's a temptation with this topic. In all my studying and listening to different podcasts and different books and different people argue one side or the other of this abortion debate, it's easy to do 2 things. One is to come across really hard and black and white and just lay down the law, a little bit like Jordan was talking about in the sermon today, where it's like you're almost trying to ridicule the other person, trying to shame the other person, really try to get at them. And then the other side of it is being like, maybe I would say hyper gentle, like really not providing clarity, being super soft, kind of sitting in the ambiguity. And you often leave those kind of with more questions than you started with, and you're just kind of adrift. And I'm going to try to ride that line between those 2 today. I'm going to focus first on more of a black and white argumentative viewpoint, try to walk through the arguments, try to understand it, and kind of provide some clarity. That is my hope, is to provide clarity in this topic. And then we will go more into the pastoral and application things with it. Part of the reason why I want to start with the clarity, start with more of the arguments, start with the foundation, is because often in this in this topic of abortion, what often happens is because the application can be so tough and because this is such an emotional topic, I would say the foundations or the fundamental arguments often get lost. So I was listening to a debate between two women who are on either side of this topic of abortion. And the emotions and the feelings and how this actually plays out in our day-to-day lives was very easily thrown back and muddied the water. And so what I want to do is we'll start with the foundations and we'll get to the pastoral application, if that's okay. So it might seem maybe a little bit cold, but we'll start there and we'll get to more of the application because I think, we'll get there. Okay, I'm going to pray. We'll begin. Heavenly Father, I ask for your blessing. I ask that you speak to us, that you would show us how you view every human life and how you have created us. Amen. So I'm going to start with some definitions. We're going to start with the definition of pro-choice and pro-life. I'm assuming everybody here has heard those two terms before, correct? Pro-choice, pro-life. Okay. Here's a hyper-simplified version of the definitions. Pro-choice supports the access to abortion. Pro-life supports the restriction to abortion. Fairly simple. Pro-choice supports the access to abortion. Pro-life supports the restriction to abortion. In this talk, I'm going to attempt to not use those words, those terms, because two reasons. One, they're very loaded with a lot of context. So if you listen to debates and if you listen to arguments on those sides, often political stuff gets roped into there. Often other lifestyle stuff gets roped in there. Often all kinds of other things get roped into these arguments because there's an assumption that when I say pro-choice, I mean 15 different things other than talking about abortion. And so I'm actually just going to I'm not going to speak in those terms. And the other side of the aspect of this is it's actually talking about the application of the foundations. It's not actually talking about the argument itself. So what I mean by that is whether you're for restriction of abortion or you're for access to abortion, that's actually an application of what you believe. It's not stating what you believe about when a human life comes into existence. It's not talking about the Imago Dei. It's actually just talking about how I apply that to this world. And so I'm actually just going to avoid those terms. Okay? Makes sense? Okay. Let's do some stats. Start with some stats. Okay, this is all Canadian. This is all Canadian stats. This is all taken from 2023 because that is when we have stats are often a few years behind because they're tabulating the stats for 2025 now, so they're not up yet, and you know how it is. So we're doing 2023 stats from Canada. They're taken from the Canadian website. So this is what Canada says about these things. Total deaths, that's all-cause mortality in 2023, was 327,546. So that's how many people passed away in 2023. The number one cause of death was malignant neoplasm. Naomi, what does that mean? Cancer. Yes. Nice. Well done. Yeah, it was cancer. And so Canada had in 2023, 84,000 deaths from cancer. That's the number one leading cause of death. To put that in perspective, suicides in 2023 was just under 4,000, so 3,837. Infant deaths, so that is between 0 and 1, there was 1,656. And then homicides / assaults. There's only, I'm going to say only because in comparing to these numbers, 354 in Canada in 2023. Abortion. So this is not counting, this doesn't count towards these stats of how many deaths. Abortions in Canada, 101,553. So if you would include that number, if you'd include that 100,000 abortions in Canada, and you'd add that to the 300 and some total deaths, that would mean that abortions would be 23.6% of all deaths in Canada, if you would include that. But that's what we're talking about today. Yes. Yes, so that is all hospitals and abortion clinics, their own recording of that, of their abortion. Anything outside of a hospital or an abortion clinic is not counted. Yeah. The day after pill. This would be hospitals and abortion clinics, so it would not include that. Yeah. That would be hard to record. Yep. Okay. I wanted to start there. I wanted you to, when I was looking these up, that was a heavy stat for me to just sit in that for a bit. Okay. When does a clump of cells become a human person? This is the hinge point of this entire argument. When does a clump of cells become a human person? When they can breathe? When they can look like a human being? When there's a heartbeat? For a lot of people, this is a very tough question, actually. When does a clump of cells become a human being? Now, if you remember from my very first class on the Imago day, do you remember I went through a bunch of different ways that the world has tried to define human beings? Do you remember some of them? A featherless biped, yes. That was one. Aristotle's man. Or I think it was Plato's man, sorry. Plato's man. A featherless biped. Nice. What were a few others? A working man. Do you remember that? We were talking about, a human is somebody who works. That was came from Karl Marx. There's a few others, right? So humanity has tried to define what a human is. And now when you try to use those terms, like let's just say a featherless biped. When does a clump of cells become a featherless biped? Pretty soon, yeah. Maybe when they have legs, right? That's maybe how you define that. Now, if we use Marx's, a man is somebody who works. When does a clump of cells become a human being? 8 years old, yeah. When they can start washing dishes, maybe. Yeah, putting their toys away. That's maybe when they. So this is tough. If we are going to define what human beings, when a clump of cells becomes a human being, there's a lot of opinions on that, and I feel like there's a lot of holes to that as well. But this is the argument. Because if we can define when something is a human being and deserves rights, we can look back at these stats and go, okay, sure, there was 100,000 abortions, but those weren't humans. That was just a clump of cells. So those aren't actual deaths, so we don't need to worry about that. But if on the other side, we find out that those are human beings, and those are deaths, now we have the biggest cause of death in Canada. And it's 23%. So this is very important. When does a clump of cells become a human being? Where would be the first place we should look? Or where would, maybe not even in our Christian context, where would be the first place somebody who maybe who's not a part of our Christian world would look to find this answer in this modern world? Scientific research. Yep. We would go to the science. And this is something that not even the outside world goes there, but even us as Christians in the North American world, Western, I'll say Western world because I'm going to talk about somebody who's from England. But in the Western world, even this idea that science can answer this question has even infiltrated our church. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yep. Jesse said that is outside of science's purview. Science can know what is and not what it should be. And that's exactly what I'm going to say. But here is what I'm going to start with, and that is Mr. N.T. Wright. Who here has heard of N.T. Wright? Right? Good theologian, Anglican, has done a lot of good for the Christian world. And he was asked on a podcast about abortion, and he was talking about the complexity of it and when it was permissible. And I want you to hear his language in talking about this. So he was talking about when is it permissible and the complexity of it. And he said this is N.T. Wright. In those cases, the sooner the better. Because at a certain point, and I'm not medically qualified to say what point I would draw a line, then this is a viable human being who should then be cherished. I'll read that again. In those cases, the sooner the better, because at a certain point, and I am not medically qualified to say at what point I would draw the line, then this is a viable human being who should then be cherished. So what is his logic on who defines when a human being when it moves from a clump of cells to a human person deserving of rights? The scientific and medical professionals determine that. So that's a great theologian. So this idea of science as the answer to this question is not only in the world, but also in our church. So what does the science say? The American College of Pediatricians, you ready for this? Say this. The predominance of human biological research confirms that human life begins at conception and fertilization. At fertilization, the human being emerges as a whole, genetically distinct individual zygote, living human organism, a member of the species Homo sapiens, needing only the proper environment in order to grow and develop. The difference between the individual in its adult stage and in its zygote stage is one of form, not nature. So what is that science saying? What is the American College of Pediatricians saying? Yep. It's an individual life because it's genetically distinct. And they would say that human life begins at fertilization. Okay. In another study, they surveyed biologists from 1,058 academic institutions around the world and asked when human life begins. So the total number of biologists they interviewed was 5,577. And 96% of them said life begins at fertilization. So science seems to be, the predominant view in science is that life begins at fertilization. That's kind of interesting, no? What does Canada say? Let's talk about Canada. The government, on their website, yep. The code, what's the word I'm looking for now? The criminal code is what I looked up on this one. And this is what Canada says. A child becomes a human being within the meaning of this act when it has completely proceeded in a living state from the body of its mother. Whether or not it has breathed, it has an independent circulation, or the navel string is severed. So when does a clump of cells become a human being according to the Canadian Criminal Code? When it is born. The Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada, so this is a pro-abortion coalition, said this in communicating how Canada views when a clump of cells becomes a human being. A child becomes a human being within the meaning, I'm reading what I just read. In Canada, a fetus does not have any rights until it is born, making it a baby at that point by law, as well as the global human rights standard. What is going on? Is this confusing to you? We have science over here saying life begins at fertilization, and then we have the Criminal Code of Canada over here saying a clump of cells becomes a human being, a person, when they are born. Yes, Carl. They have two different definitions of life. Mom? Yeah. Yeah. If I would change sides now, I would be considered a murderer. Yeah. Yeah. That is very true. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yep. No. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. So they do have a stipulation in the criminal code that if during the labor some doctor or something does something that ends up killing the baby after birth, I guess, like they kind of link it, like if you do something that does kill the baby before birth, that it's considered malpractice and that you can get charged with that. So they have a loophole with, or they have something there. So there is something there for that. But it's it's a great question. I don't know exactly that. I don't know the answer to that one. According to my understanding of the criminal code, you'd be charged because you killed the mother, not because you killed the child. Yeah. Carl, were you going to say something? What is going on here? What is going on here is this idea of a separation between what is a human and what is a person. This is the separation that is happening. So in science, we can say human life begins at fertilization, but a person, which is what is deserving of rights, only happens at birth. So there's a separation between who I am physically and my DNA and somebody deserving of rights. They're cutting this line and separating it. And can science tell us when someone deserves rights? Is this a scientific question? Is this something we can do in the laboratory? No. It's a philosophical, moral question, like Jesse already said. So science can't really tell us much. Where's the next place we could go to look for this moral answer to this question? We can look to the Bible. We're Christians, right? We look to the Bible. We go back to the Bible. Alrighty. I'm going to hammer through these because we're running out of time. We are going to look at 1, 2, 3, 4 different passages. And I want you to think, like just listen to keywords that are used as I roll through these. Psalm 139, 13 to 16. For you, that is God, formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes see my unformed substance, and in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was not one of them. Job 31:15, and this is Job talking to God, or talking, and he's going to reference God. Did he, that is God, who made me in the womb, make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? Isaiah 49, verse 1. This is Isaiah talking about God calling him. Listen to me, O coastlands, and give attention, you peoples from afar. The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother. He named my name. And then Jeremiah 1:4-5. Again, Jeremiah talking about God calling him. Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you prophet to the nations. How is the unborn talked about in the Bible? There is no distinction of personhood. Intentionality. Yes, this intimate relationship with God. You hear that language? Like, it's personal. It's intimate. It's relational. God is knitting individuals together in the womb. And they're individuals. They're not like God is creating this group of cells and we don't know where it's going to end up, but then he was born, and then at the point of birth, Jeremiah, I'm going to call you now because now you're Jeremiah. God is like, no, you're Jeremiah all the way through. I'm knitting you together. I'm calling you out for this purpose. It is personal, intimate. As someone who, God talks to them as someone who is already born. Remember Genesis 1. Remember that the image of God in Genesis 1 is something that is given to us and not earned by us. Remember that. So it's not something that we can grasp, which means we don't have to worry about our identity and who we are and our value and our innate personhood is not tied to whether we can or cannot work, or whether we have legs, or whatever those things may be. It is something that is given to us. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book, The Ethics, says this, and I just love this quote so much. The right to live is a matter of essence and not of any values. In the sight of God, there is no life that is not worth living, for life itself is valued by God. The Bible does not make this distinction between a human and a person, between us living physically and a person deserving of rights. They are intricately woven together. Now you might ask, well, maybe this abortion thing is just kind of something we're dealing with in this modern world. It wasn't really a question the Bible was dealing with much. And maybe we're just reading the verses in this Bible just kind of the way we want to. Maybe church history has a different view of this. Like, how can we validate what we're reading is what, are other people reading the Bible the same way? Are other people understanding that? Well, let's look into church history. Let's look into the 1st and 2nd century. So that is 100 to 300 AD in this time frame. Ready? So this is right after the New Testament is completed. This is the early church fathers. This is somebody, if they're going to have a different opinion than what we have about the Bible, it's maybe something to take note of because they were right there. Well, let's start with what's called the Didache. What does the Didache say? This is an early church writing. And it says this. After a long list, so it goes on a long list of things you shouldn't do, like murder and adultery and some of those types of things. What does the Didache say? It says this: you shall not murder a child by abortion nor kill that which is begotten. That word murder in Greek is the same word that both Jesus and Paul use when quoting the sixth commandment, which is, you shall not murder. So the Didache is linking murder and abortion. Maybe that's just one writer. Are there more? Well, how about Clement of Alexandria? This is what he said. Women who resort to some sort of deadly abortion drug kill not only the embryo, but along with it, all human kindness. Pretty strong language from Mr. Clement. And one final author we'll talk about in this 1st and 2nd century, and that is Tertullian. And he says this: in our case, a murder being once for all forbidden, we may not destroy even the fetus in the womb. While as yet the human being derives blood from other parts of the body for its sustenance. To hinder a birth is merely a speedier man-killing. Nor does it matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to birth. That is, a man which is going to be one. You have the fruit already in its seed. So the early church fathers, I would say fairly clearly, link abortion to murder. So here's the summary. And remember, this is us. This is me being maybe a little bit. I'm trying to provide clarity. Here we go. Ready? Summary. According to the science, human life begins at conception. That is what happens. The Bible does not make a distinction when someone becomes a person in the womb. They are always a person in the womb, according to the Bible. The unborn in the womb are considered unique persons with specific plans and relationships with God, the Creator. And the early church echoes this sentiment, considering abortion, whether chemically induced or physically induced, murder, like the sixth commandment. I think it's fairly clear. Now this is where the hard part comes, I think. Application. What do we do with this? Is there situations where abortion is permissible? What about the instances of rape or incest or say a 10-year-old girl getting pregnant? What do we do there? We struggle. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. They're very small portion of that. Jordan. Adding evil to evil doesn't make it good. Unlike math, where a minus and a minus doesn't equal a positive, doesn't work here. Does God still love me if I had an abortion? I know one thing, Carl. I have definitely broken a lot of those 10 commandments in my life. And I believe he still loves me, and I think the Bible says that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a fair thing. I think often in this application, we somehow think abortion is different than some of these other 10 commandments or some of the sins that we've committed. Right? Like, how do we love, like, let's if I would take what Jordan was saying, like, how do we deal with somebody who's had an abortion, or like, how do we interact with them? Well, how do we interact with somebody like me who's had a porn addiction? Did you just condemn me? Throw me to the side? I don't think so, right? How about somebody who really struggles with rage and anger and has a really dark past in that regard? I think this just hits home a little bit different. Yeah, so we're not going to have, for those online, I guess, who are going to listen to this, I didn't repeat most of what was said, so you're going to have a nice long pause there. Yeah, this topic, I think the application stuff is very tough. And I think that's where I'm pretty convicted that the church as a whole should agree on the foundation. That I think the Bible's pretty clear. I think science is pretty clear. Like when an egg meets a sperm and they unite, there's actually an electrical shock, like a pulse that happens, and there's a poof, like life is formed, and it's just that poof. They've actually recorded this thing, right? So there's like, when those things meet, it like life happens. And so with science, I think life starts conception, right? That's pretty clear. The Bible talks about the unborn in the womb as an individual person. Church history echoes this sentiment. This is what the church believes. But I think where maybe we can have room is, what does that look like in our world and applying that? Does that mean we have to outlaw all abortion in all circumstances? I'm not going to pretend that I know that answer. I have my opinions. I think everybody here has opinions on how much restrictions we should do with abortion, how much we should not do. I'm on board to talk through those things as long as we both agree that either way it's murder. Right? Like, you're actually killing an individual. You're killing somebody. And here's something that's been going through my head as I've been preparing, and I think this is helpful. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I hear a noise in Monroe's room, and I walk there, and there's somebody with a weapon over his crib about to end his life, I am going to do whatever it takes to prevent that from happening, which might mean ending someone else's life. Now, am I justified in that? What will the criminal code say in that regard? I mean, there's a lot of circumstances, but I would say a lot of people here would likely say I'm pretty justified to protect my family. But that doesn't mean I have to pretend that that person who broke into my house wasn't actually a person and I didn't kill anyone. I don't have to pretend that. I can say two things at once. And that is a human person who broke into my house, and I actually killed them. But at the same time, I believe that in that moment, there's justification for why I did that. I think that's just a helpful thing to think about in this. We do not have to necessarily say a baby in the womb is not a person in order to have a little different opinions on how that should be acted out in this world. We're well over time. And then one final thing I'm going to mention is dig in if you want to dig into what the Christian view of suffering is. Because I know Jordan mentioned it at MAID, when we were talking about MAID. And suffering and hardship in the Bible and as a Christian is actually a time of sanctification and growing, and a way God grows in us and grows us. And often in these topics, it's like, it would be so much easier, it'd be so much less suffering if I would just do these things. But yet, that's negating God's use of suffering. And one more Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote, and I thought this was very powerful. We cannot indeed ignore the fact that precisely the supposedly worthless life of the incurable sick evokes from the healthy, from the doctors, nurses, and relatives, the very highest measure of social self-sacrifice, and even genuine heroism. This devoted service which is rendered by sound life to the sick life, has given rise to real values which are of the highest utility for the community. So in that act of dealing with pain and suffering, somebody who is unable to take care of themselves, we actually have the opportunity as the Christian church to show heroism and true value of caring for people and caring for people that can't take care of themselves. It actually gives an opportunity, suffering gives the opportunity for sacrifice and growth. So I wanted to leave us there. I've already taken way too much time. Okay, I'll pray and then we'll. Heavenly Father, work in our hearts, work in our lives. Help us to value all human persons with equal dignity, respect, and love. Help us to sacrifice ourselves for each other and show a little bit of you to those around us every day. Amen.